This week, we are donning our stetsons and grabbing a cold one. I apologise, it doesn't sound right coming from such a British accent, as we discuss the most rootin' tootin' American music genre of them all. From Dolly Parton to Taylor Swift with a little bit of Footloose, country has come to epitomise the US. But as the genre's popularity booms internationally, does its Americanness still endure? In this episode, I'm going to ask what makes country music so American. Welcome to America, a history podcast. I'm Liam Heffernan, and every week we answer a different question to understand the people, the places, and the events that make the USA what it is today. To discuss this, I'm joined by a man with nearly 50 years of broadcasting on his CV, but he's also a huge country music fan, currently living the dream as head of radio operations at CountryLine Radio, which is one of the biggest UK country music stations. So a big hello and howdy to John Collins.
Hello.
Do you know what? I wrote that script and it sounded much better on paper than it did actually reading it out.
I'm fine, y'all.
It's great to have you on the show, John. And you know, I've been a listener of CountryLine for many years, and I love what you do, especially, you know, I'm going to say, like, versus some of the other competitors in the UK, you play a lot more of the classic stuff, and I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a mixture, really. We do a lot of the current stuff and we do a lot of the older stuff, and we're prepared to go back into the late 80s, early 90s and before if necessary. Because I think country music is such a broad church. You can't be a country station and just play, you know, a narrow subset of it, because we are a completely fan-led operation that hopes to make money, as opposed to a money-making opportunity that happens to play country music. And the two they're quite distinct mindsets.
It is that real sense that it's kind of fans playing the music they love that really is the appeal of CountryLine.
Yeah, yeah, and sometimes I think it can get a bit wearing. An old program director of mine once said, "John, do you have to say you like every song you play?" I was like, "Yeah, occasionally," but I think it's nice, you know, for and by fans. We're all in this gang together, and we can remember when country wasn't cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, probably not a huge giveaway that you're not American.
No, Central Scotland, born and bred.
Yeah. So I'm just kind of wondering, you know, I'm here as an Englishman, you're sat there as a Scot, but we're both fans of country music. So when did you first find the genre?
Kind of all my life I've been exposed to it. Scotland, like Ireland, has always had a bit of a love, you know, going back to Jim Reeves and that kind of era of stuff. So these guys were on my radar as I was growing up, and I always wanted to work in radio, always. And in 1977, I was 14. A hospital radio station opened literally 3 miles up the road from where I lived then, and 1 mile from where I am now, Radio Royal. And I went through the process and became a presenter. And these were the days when you were told what the show was, because they decided on the music for the audience as opposed to, what would you like to play? And I wasn't a particular country fan, but they gave me a show called The Country Clinic, and it was 7:30 on a Thursday evening. And I did that for several years. And it was great because it kind of took me from being somebody who had Chris Christopherson on my radar to actually, you know, bringing out a Chris Christopherson album and selecting tracks from it and doing it, you know, the old-fashioned way. And it was great. And I've been in and around radio for a long time, and country's always cropped up. Obviously, I've played, you know, top 40 music in the BBC and in commercial, but then I spent a long time producing Radio Scotland's country show. And Ricky Ross started coming in as our presenter when Brian, who was the old presenter, went over to do a different show in the station. And that was what alerted me to the fact that there was a whole lot of us in the closet who really loved and understood country music and all the subgenres within it. And it's kind of never gone away. So when Bauer DJ'd a country show, I was like the first guy in there with my hand up.
No, I'm with you on that. I think that, so I was first kind of exposed to country music really young because my mum was a big fan. So I just remember Patsy Cline and Dolly Parton always playing in the background. And but it wasn't until, I guess, kind of 10 years ago when Chris Country, which became CountryLine Radio, started to gain a bit of traction, and it was picking up on my DAB signal down in the southeast of England. And you know, I thought I'd tune in, and it was like Maren Morris and, you know, that sort of music, and, you know, hearing My Church play out, and, you know, it was so modern, and so it kind of really straddled the line with pop music versus what I was like used to hearing. And it's like, I think there's a stigma, isn't there, to country music?
There certainly was. Some of it, I think country music's responsible for, and some of it, the kind of there is a naff end to country music fandom, as there is with every other kind of music. And you know, some of the dressing up to me is maybe a wee bit egregious. I say that as a man who wears a Stetson from time to time, but we didn't go out of our way to make ourselves seem accessible and of the mainstream, let's put it that way. And then Maren came along, Sam Hunt came along, and if you remember when Sam Hunt started releasing stuff, people thought he was the Antichrist of country music. Yeah. Because here he was bringing huge R&B style sounds into the music. And now, well, he won me over at whatever year it was, 2016, 2017 C2C. It was just extraordinary, and that's when I got it. That's when I understood what he was doing, and I think the music has continued to evolve. I mean, as we were recording this, I was listening to Radio 4 earlier today, and they were talking about Beyonce being snubbed in the CMA Awards nomination. Now, I'm a CMA member. I didn't put Beyonce down as any of my nominations, but nothing to do with anything other than I didn't rate the album particularly. I thought the single was good, but We're now in a place where we can talk about Beyonce legitimately and why we didn't consider her for a country music award. That's amazing.
Yeah, and it's mad, isn't it? Because even just a few years ago, Justin Bieber sort of teaming up with Dan and Shay for 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
That was a huge song, and that really took people by surprise. You know, the fact that Bieber was doing country music. So for Beyonce to release a whole album, I mean, that was I had to do a double take when I saw the news, because it just didn't seem like, it just didn't marry up in my head.
Well, you've got her, you've got Shabuzi successfully straddling two genres. There's just loads of them, and I think that's really Post Malone again, 4 or 5 nominations. It's just extraordinary. You know, the steps that have been made, and as I said again, Posty, real country fan who came out of the country closet.
Yeah, and I guess let's just dive into something a bit heavier right now, because, you know, you've mentioned about, you know, the CMA nominations, and we're recording this like literally just after those nominations have been announced. But, you know, Beyonce, one of the biggest country albums of the year, probably of the decade, in terms of its ability to sort of hit the mainstream, completely snubbed. And someone, I forget the name, there's another nominee he had 4 or 5 nominations last year, and he's been nominated again this year. But he got in trouble a few years ago for...
It's Morgan Wallen.
Yes.
Morgan, 7 nominations?
Yes. So, you know, he's a prolific sort of CMA nominee, and he's been in trouble in the past for, you know, saying things that were racially insensitive. And then you get the sort of snubbing of Beyonce. Is there a problem in country music that maybe it's still quite a white person genre?
It's certainly improving. In the last 5 years, Chapel Hart, there's several artists of colour now really breaking through. I think they were always there, but it was difficult because the target market for the American record labels was typically in the southern half of America. And that has its own basket of insecurities that, you know, will still take decades to finally wash out. And I think the minute the record companies looked up and thought, oh, hang on a minute, we've got a bit of a worldwide thing going on here. And Europe in particular is really quite integrated, no matter what you think about the newspapers here. And they began to understand that other forms of country music, artists of colour, and Morgan Wallen comes out of a slightly different tradition, which doesn't sit well with us. It's in the same way as many of us look a little askance when you see an artist openly supporting Trump or loving their guns. and so on, because that doesn't quite fit the British sensibility. But they turn it down a notch, and I don't think we get the kind of full strength gun rack on the back of the pickup truck thing.
There's this weird kind of image issue now, I think, with country music that and maybe the fact that Beyonce didn't get nominated is actually playing exactly into the reason why she released a country album, right? Because it's taking it away from the white man, and actually the fact that people weren't willing to embrace that, or certainly award givers weren't willing to embrace that, kind of makes a point, doesn't it?
It absolutely makes a point. My problem with the Beyonce album was, and bizarrely, my second favourite kind of music is R&B, and I just felt it wasn't country enough. It was an experimental country-tinged R&B album into which she put in some extraordinary performances and so on. But to me personally, I just felt there were stronger albums. So when I was selecting my favourite 5 albums of the year, it just didn't quite make the cut. We played Texas Hold'em when it came out straight away. Didn't mess about. And other people waited to see how it would settle. And particularly in America, a lot of stations didn't get onto it for maybe a month. And that's rare with an artist of that stature. Normally they would effectively debut on all radio stations. But she's made her point. I think she's made her point very, very well. And as you say quite rightly, I think the morning after the night before, people are wondering, is there a racial element to the Beyonce snub? I genuinely, in my case, it's not. I just didn't think the music was good enough. But my goodness, she's raised a flag.
Yeah, and it kind of brings me on to this sort of struggle that I have as well in terms of what kind of defining what country music is, because I feel like sometimes if a particular individual is associated with country music and seen as a country singer, it doesn't matter what sort of what they release, it's considered country. Because there are some, Maren Morris, I think, being an example. I don't think a lot of her stuff, particularly more recent stuff, is that country.
No.
But it's considered country. So kind of why does that differ from like what Beyonce's doing?
Maren Morris, Casey Musgraves, arguably, another artist who I absolutely adore, but she's into that trippy, dippy thing much more than she's into twang and songs about biscuits. I wonder whether once you've earned your country chops, we will keep letting you into our front room.
Yeah.
Kane Brown seems to go release about R&B, straight up country, R&B, straight up country, and we let him do that. Whereas it's maybe harder for somebody outside who's got an established career to break their way in. Post Malone and Beyonce being 2 exemplary artists who've done that thing. And Post Malone's album is straight up the middle. That's a country album that's dripping with country references.
Yeah, I think it's no longer uncool to do country though, is it?
No, not at all. And that's the thing that amazes me every day. I get up early in the morning and look at the overnight emails that are coming in, whatever, and it is like, this is not a niche interest anymore.
No, it's not. And I think Chris Country, now CountryLine, were sort of the first radio station to really play country music, sort of dedicated country music at the sort of scale that you did in the UK. And then, a lot of big players have come along since, Is it Global that own Absolute?
Global are Smooth, Absolute are Bauer. But yeah, and I'll tell you now, both are very good radio stations. They do what they do. But Chris did the proof of concept. Now, it's a great story. He went to the States to work. He's a jingle producer, musician. And he went to the States to do that, grew to love country music by listening to it on the radio. And then when he came back to the UK to work, because it's very easy now to set up an online radio station, he set up an online radio station and it was playing on a computer in his bedroom. And it sounded huge because Chris knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
But there we were with the UK's country station, and we had that ground to ourselves for a long time.
Yeah, I remember like you were really the only station in the UK for a while that I could tune into, and I'm sure a lot of others that were just country music, and then suddenly everyone loved country music again. And like, what do you think it is that's caused this resurgence, like internationally in country?
There's a newness to it outside the States. There's a slightly old-fashioned vibe in that it's singles with recognizable pop structures that sound like they're being played on real instruments, and they've got a beginning, a middle eight, and chorus. They tend to end, which is a thing that wasn't happening before, and I think people buy into the stories, and there's a bit of a love of the lifestyle goes on. My daughters are 30 and 34, and when I started doing the stuff at Chris Country, they hated it, and now both of them pay money to go to gigs. And it's their go-to genre. And Gillian in particular says it's the songs, it's about the music, and some of the artists are easy on the eye.
I mean, you touched on this sort of, there's an almost lifestyle aspiration to the genre that it promotes, but do you think the same music and the sort of the same look and feel of country music is the same internationally as it is in the US in terms of what sells?
It seems to be. It's interesting because I tend to follow, not slavishly, but I tend to follow what the American airplay chart is doing and be aware of that. And if we take a flyer on a track because I think it's great and I just want to get it on the radio, you tend to find that it'll work over there. So it may be that I've become Stockholm syndrome and I'm doing it I'm following the Americans without even realizing I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And the Australians do the same. There's a growing scene in Australia. There's a growing scene in South Africa. And interestingly, we're all playing much the same stuff. Now, the Country Music Association, CMA, has international task forces, and they bring together broadcasters, bookers. In the UK one, it's quarterly. Well, European one, it's quarterly. And I'll be there with colleagues from Radio 2, Global, Bauer, blah, blah, blah. Because we're all fans, ultimately. And we're able to say, okay, this is going well, that's going well. And we'll get insights into, the speed that the genre is growing at. The number of streams of country music has grown by 82% in 12 months.
Wow. Now,
interestingly, that's not translated into linear radio listening. I would love to have grown my radio audience by 82%. But I think a lot of people are, because you can be quite geeky in country music, are curating or finding their own playlists and doing it that way. So the consumption model's different. This is not people that grew up with different DJs on Radio 1 or their local radio station. This is people who've made a choice to go to a slightly more niche. I think we're the 6th biggest genre in Britain just now.
Wow.
Just behind dance. But people have said, I like this music, I'm going to find out more.
I wonder what that appeal is like at its core, because this is, as you say, this isn't people who routinely love listening to and discovering music. They're hunting out country music because they've decided they like country music. So what is the appeal about it?
I'm thinking. I think the appeal is in the pop songs, the relatable stories, the structure of it, the cultural wraparound of country music is different to the cultural wraparound of urban music styles. I mean, it's interesting. Guns do pop up in country music, but you tend to use them for shooting deer during deer hunting season. And in other genres of music, the use case is different.
Yeah.
There's something unique. There's something open about country music, and it's also happily willing to plunder other genres these days, which I think is great. And it draws people in. And people like Shabuzi are like the gateway drug. And they'll come in, because Tipsy's a great song, and they'll come in and they'll love Tipsy, and then suddenly they're into Kane Brown, then you're into Sam Hunt, and you've got the old Webb Pierce, There Stands the Glass song on the front of one of his tracks, and there's people going all the way back to 1955, just like that. And I love that. I think that's fantastic when that happens, because a journey is possible and there's a deep, deep history.
And I wonder if over time the genre's become a little bit of a caricature of itself in the way that it's sort of promoting America and the South, because you're right, there's something that's very deep south about country music, and I think with that there's this sort of glamorous appeal to the kind of ideals that it's promoting.
It's wholesome though. They do exist. Sunday Morning Coming Down, one of them, but there's very few songs that have the don't have the hint of redemption about them. It's okay to have a few drinks on Friday and go to church on Sunday, which is not the prevailing view in just about any other genre of music. Yeah. And in a lot of ways, it's maybe closer, not to our exact real lives, but it's maybe closer to, the way normal people live their lives.
Yeah, it's almost like you've got this typical country singer, or certainly the typical male country singer, like tends to have this image of, as you say, this sort of religious kind of beer drinking, pickup truck driving, little bit rough around the edges, kind of anti-hero, right?
Correct. And Morgan Wallen's egregious behaviour in the past would be 10 a penny in many other genres of music, but in country music, didn't get away with it, and he had to come grovelling back to his record company.
Do you think, though, that the part of the popular appeal of people like that is the fact that they do play into the good and the bad of what we kind of expect from the South?
Yeah, I think so. Now, I don't actually think Kip Moore's from the Deep South will get proven wrong the minute I've said that. But if you think about it, he typifies that kind of trope of the tattooed, gun-loving, wrapping himself up in the flag thing, but he still loves God and his mum.
Yeah.
And I think that is really interesting and really powerful, because in many ways, it's not as aggressive as other kinds of music. Eventually, who was it? Toby Keith. All the drunk Americans end up down in the pub together. Doesn't matter who they love. And I think it's almost as if you're joining a community.
Yeah, there's definitely a sort of camaraderie to country music that other genres don't provide, I think.
And absolutely, yeah. And I find that actually amongst country broadcasters, behind the scenes, we're pretty much all friends.
Yeah, and I wonder if there's a bit of a catch-22 though with the genre, in that it's sort of sold on the sort of the lifestyle and the ideals that sort of underlie country music, and the themes around it. But as the genre gets more international and as it grows and more people from more countries start to emerge as, popular country singers, does that fundamental sort of values sort of that underpin the genre and used to, does that get a bit lost?
I think so. I think that is going to be a challenge. I get to hear quite a lot of German and Scandinavian country music. And with the honourable exception of Texas Lightning and the Common Linnets, a lot of it sounds just slightly left field of country. Now, the only nation that's managed to put together a country scene that sounds uniquely all of its own and it's easy to approve of is Ireland. That whole Irish scene, some of it is absolutely wonderful. Other bits of it are not my cup of tea. But my goodness, Ireland has developed its own take on country music and managed to make something of it. But it doesn't trouble the US, does it? Similarly, the European and Scandinavian stuff, I think we're going to have the same picture with that. It still seems to be that if you want to make it big, you're going to have to end up in Tennessee and, get into that system.
Yeah, it does still feel like Nashville is the not even just the spiritual home, but the very kind of physical home of country music. And it does make me wonder that, it kind of comes back to this sort of definition problem of country music, because if country music is no longer American, then what is it?
It is American, but it's American for the world. In the same way as I would find it difficult to construct an argument that said prog rock is Australian. It's not. It's a British thing that is popular around the world, and there are fantastic bands in the States doing that did great work in that genre, but then they ended up wearing spandex and playing that kind of pop rock thing. It's still different. So I think it's okay. We're not in a bad place yet, and I don't think the people who are like all over country music would allow it to lose its soul.
It's a sort of difficult balancing act because, as we touched on before, the issues around Beyonce and some of these sorts of like stigmas are almost a little bit kind of self-inflicted from the country sort of music industry. How does it kind of break down those barriers whilst retaining kind of the core that sort of people come to expect from the genre?
Ooh, I think there's so much breadth in the offering right across country music that I don't think country music breaks down the barriers. The listeners, the people that enjoy the music, do the barrier breaking. If you look at, I mentioned him earlier, Jason Isbell, for example, we don't play him. I don't think Smooth or Absolute play him, but he can do a sold out tour of the UK. And that Americanness scene is doing well because people have searched it out. The UK country scene is in rude health.
Yeah.
I probably get more correspondence from listeners around Homegrown, the UK show we do, than I do from any other part of the station. The rest of it is people looking for shout outs. The other one is, who was that artist that Tim played at 25 past 7, and go and look it out and send the website details to them and whatever. So I think the country listeners, from what we were saying earlier about the voyage of discovery, I think country listeners are prepared to do a wee bit more heavy lifting than somebody who just sticks on the radio in the background.
Yeah, and I'm going to just fact check something here before I explain why I'm asking. Lady A are British, are they not?
No, Nashville based.
Okay. So I think either way, it would have been more interesting if they were British, perhaps a little bit more worrying actually that they're American. But they obviously had a very kind of public rebranding of their name because they were Lady Antebellum. And they became Lady A. They kind of passed it off as, they didn't really understand the connotations and the meaning behind their name. But there is a slightly problematic base to country music, isn't there? That's kind of represented by names like that.
Yeah. And it goes back, pretty much all the way. It's been difficult for artists of colour to get picked up and played. And other people would buy into, right, we need a nice southern name. And, if you can be an accidental racist in that you don't get the connotations, you maybe short of sophistication on that. And think, that sounds like a great name. We'll go with that. I wish you hadn't done that.
Yeah.
It's, and I think because country as a genre has become more accepting of, 7 or 8 years ago, it was difficult to get women on country radio.
Yeah.
Consultants were saying that the people that listen to country radio want to hear guys. And they were wrong, of course, but this was the way it was working. So I think as the world modernizes, so does the genre, and our listeners, especially the ones coming in now, expect us to reflect the real world and not this made-up mom's apple pie America.
Yeah, and I do think, though, and you might completely disagree with me here, but I feel like female country singers used to still sing to men in what they were singing about and how they were singing. Whereas you look at sort of more modern country music, things like, Kelsey Ballerini, Hole in the Bottle, for instance. I mean, that is a song that is very much a song by a woman for a woman. And, I can't even think of the song now, but is it Diane? I want to say Diane.
Diane.
She's talking about
accidentally sleeping with somebody's husband.
Yeah. And it's kind of like that is very much a song, by a woman, for women.
Yes.
That didn't used to really happen. No. So I feel like that's reflective of the new audience where more women are engaging with country music. Right?
Way back at the start of Chris Country / CountryLine, Maddie and Tay's Girl in a Country Song is all about that whole image of girls were meant to wear short shorts, have their tartan blouse tied in a bow, and lean against the pickup truck and look sexy. And it's the whole song is effectively a rant against that idea. And I was convinced they wouldn't get picked up for anything else, but it turns out Maddie and Tate are brilliant. And they just make great music. So they've survived. I think a lot of men my age in America that have worked in country radio since the 70s and 80s have had to take a bit of a long, hard look at themselves and incorporate other artists. Maren Morris, she addresses gender fluidity and all sorts of things. That's really great and really important.
Yeah, and I think, certainly, and this is partly the credit, of stations like CountryLine who are, making it mainstream in countries beyond America. But the genre, it definitely feels like it's changing.
I can't remember a time when it's not been changing, though. I'm quite boring in real life in that I will go back and listen to old stuff.
Yeah.
And when you see how far it's come over the years, it's had a fairly rapid trajectory since the second half of the 60s, when it stopped being bluegrass and Jim Reeves. It's you've got that kind of slightly more orchestral 90s vibe going on. You've got Garth Brooks arriving and turning it into a stadium genre, Brooks and Dunn, and so on. The clever artists, the Dollys, the Kennys, etc., grew with it. Loretta Lynn doing an album with Jack White. I mean, whatever next? But all of that stuff, these were the people that were moving country on from back then to where it gets to be now. And I'll tell you for free that the more thoughtful of today's artists, because there still is a singer-songwriter writing songs in the bus on the road thing goes on in country music. They respect the past but don't want to live in it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of looking at it, actually. And I think there is still so much history and tradition in country music, not just in the music itself, but in how it's performed and, the sort of the values that it kind of presents. And I think that's why it feels so American to me, is because you just can't disassociate the sort of that from the genre.
I couldn't agree more. And I am that guy who enjoys American sports and follows American politics closely and all of that business. So perhaps I don't get caught on the Americanness of it because I spend a lot of time in my head in that world.
Yeah, well, I'm with you there. But before we sort of wrap up, I do have one question I want to ask you, because country music, you've spent a lot of years playing country music and talking about it. If there was one country music artist, dead or alive, that you could meet and chat to, who would it be?
I would love to sit down and have a pint with Charlie Pride. Fascinating artist, amazing voice. And he came to the fore in an era when African-American country artists really didn't exist, and they used to drive around the radio stations, and the owners would be, all right, and they would try not to be, racist to his face. I think he'd be a fascinating guy from a really interesting era of country music when it was beginning to change into something, more akin to where we are now. Of the ones I've met, I was starstruck meeting Brad Paisley earlier in the year, and to the point where you do a quick interview, and they are often very quick interviews with a star, and it's just like boom, 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 key points, and you hit the bullet points. Paisley stops, considers his answer, and gives you an answer that's good, and he rewards you for doing a bit of research. If you're prepared to demonstrate that you've done a bit of research, you'll get a better answer. And I thought, you're a blooming clever man, and just to interact with it at that level, because you didn't particularly see the wheels turning, but you knew he was engaging himself. Now I really like that. I'd also like to meet Dolly. If ever I go disappearing for a couple of days, it's because Dolly Parton's made herself available.
I mean, that's fair. I mean, I think everyone would like to meet Dolly, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, on that note, I think we should probably wrap up this episode, because I do feel like I could talk to you about country music all day long, John. But
I can talk to anybody about it all day long.
But yeah, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. And for anyone listening as well, we're going to put some useful links in the show notes of some of the stuff that we've been chatting about. And, if you want to go listen to CountryLine, I'll make it as easy as possible for you. Just follow the links. But John, if anyone wants to connect with you, where can they do that?
Probably easiest either on X, I'm at Johnco, JOHNCO, or drop me an email, john@countryline.radio.
Awesome. And you can find me, if you want to, on X as well via This Is The Hef, and on LinkedIn, just search for my name. And if you enjoy listening to this podcast, do just take 10 seconds out your day to leave us a quick rating and review wherever you're listening to this, and give us a follow, because then all future episodes will drop straight into your feed. Thank you so much for listening, and goodbye.